con me? Se vuoi ci mettiamo Enea.
Bello, vieni.
Enea. Mettiti qua, vieni.
Perché non vediamo niente.
Ma Marco, lo faccio mettere qua.
Sì, ok. Puoi stare... Sì, bravo.
Siamo qua.
Bonjour à tous. Donc je vous demande d'accueillir
Please give a warm welcome to Susanna Nicciarelli,
Leonardo Maltese,
Paolo Pierobon,
Barbara Ronchi,
Barbara Ronchi,
Marco Bellochio, Fausto
Russo, Alesi, Fabrizio Gifuni, Beppe Caccetto, Simone Gattoni, and Paolo Del Brocco.
Et tout de suite, on va commencer par une question pour Marco Bellochio. Je voulais savoir pour quelle raison il a décidé de consacrer un film au destin d'Edgardo
Mortara.
Si vous pouvez mettre votre casque si vous le souhaitez, vous aurez...
To listen to the interpretation.
Mettez votre casque, vous avez une traduction
Put on your headset because you'll have simultaneous interpretation.
A été une décision très naturelle dans le sens que on a lu un livre d'une écrivaine catholique très conservateur qui s'appelle Messori, qui défendait au fond les choix
which defended the choices of the Pope.
Avec le témoignage
and with the various testimonies and autobiographies
di Edgardo Mortara.
Of Edgardo Mortara, I read about this.
Il dit des choses d'une manière très candide.
He says things in a very frank, open way. He talks
rencontre avec sa mère,
his mother,
who
was a bit like you see in the film. And the other very mysterious episode is the one when he's a teenager. And he rushes and hits the Pope, who falls down. He was so enthusiastic. This is an historic event which shows that Edgardo Mortara hadn't totally surrendered. In his subconscious, there was something which told him to save his life with his family and therefore be against the Pope. At the end, at the Pope's funeral, he doesn't care. He talks about what a pig he is, and then he corrects his stance. At the end, there's a very powerful scene that you can see at the end of the film.
Alors, on a une question peut-être?
We have a question?
S'il vous plaît.
I'm Mr. Bellochio. I'm Robert from the Netherlands. I've got a question for you. You're one of the oldest contestants in competition this year. It takes about 3 years to make a film. Does it become more difficult to pick the right projects which you can make and that you want to make when you're older? And could you elaborate on the interest of Steven Spielberg in this project? You mentioned it a little in the interview. Could you elaborate some more? Thank you.
È più difficile scriverlo che farlo? No.
È difficile.
Metti le cuffie.
Vous pouvez prendre votre casque, on va...
Più difficile? No,
well,
io ho letto il libro e
I read the
succede
book
così, mi sono innamorato di
that I
questa
mentioned
storia,
earlier on.
e
I
quindi
fell in love with this story.
come ci insegnano a scuola, nasce l'ispirazione nascono le immagini per poterla realizzare.
It's the question of an inspiration that hits you, like at school, and then it was a question of working out the images.
È stato molto importante con
I might add with Susanna Nicchiarelli,
abbastanza impetuoso, abbastanza rapido,
there was the script, which played a very important part. We had everything. We had all the material for the story. We had all the material to make a film. But as I said earlier, on other occasions, I didn't make a film against the Pope or to condemn the Catholic Church. In this story, the Pope is the bad guy. But that's not what I really wanted to show or depict. I wanted to save him, in fact. There's a basic principle, which I might refer to intolerance. It's as though religion inevitably became intolerant. There's certain principles, certain dogmas, which have at all costs to be respected. Otherwise, that spells the end of the religion itself. And that doesn't justify the position adopted by the Pope in this story. In fact, he adopts a very extreme position vis-à-vis Edgardo. And Edgardo is here with us.
On va passer. Et Spielberg, la question était aussi sur Spielberg et sur le projet.
About Spielberg and this project as well.
Ah, su Spielberg?
Oui.
Sì. Ma l'ho già detto.
Well, I already said. You always have to repeat the same things, but never mind. I'll repeat what I already said.
È una piccola cronaca, però quando io lessi il libro di
this event is a minor one, but when I read Missori's book about this story, I was deeply touched, as though I really wanted to be part of this story. I'm a Catholic. I'm not practicing, a practicing Catholic, but I've never been kidnapped. I've never been abducted, and this story deeply moved me. Then I discovered that the very great Steven Spielberg was preparing a film on Edgardo Mortara as well, but based on another book. He'd already started preparing this film and contacted various colleagues. He did some locations scouting in Italy. And several actors had already been contacted. However, as stated, Spielberg's project then came to a halt because he didn't find the child, the right child. I think that's only half the story. The film cannot be made in a language other than Italian, and furthermore, with regional accents, regional Italian accents. And we needed people speaking Hebrew. An American actor who speaks English is far removed from all that. It would have been a totally different film had it been shot in English.
Bonjour, Brigitte de Radio Flamme, Cherbourg,
Radio Flamme, Cherbourg, France. Marco, your film is very powerful. Congratulations. I'd like to know, and this is a question that I want to put to you and to the members of the team. I'd like to ask what it's, how you feel when you finish the shooting of this kind of film. It's a heavy atmosphere, the characters are very powerful ones. How did everyone emotionally experience this shooting of the film, and how did people feel at the end of the actual shooting?
Non è che ci sono stati traumi, però una lavorazione
Of course, we were hugely traumatized.
Non pesante, comunque perché
The
faceva molto
atmosphere
caldo.
wasn't heavy. It was very, very hot at the time, and the poor actors were dressed in very heavy costumes that made them feel very hot. With the actors, we had a wonderful relationship. The actors became deeply involved in the project, without fanaticism, of course, but they were engaged in depth. Of course, Edgardo, and I would like to say this, in his presence, he was what we were most concerned about. Often you have children who just speak their words in advertisements or elsewhere. But this young actor really surprised us. His voice, the way he looks, he really manages to describe the situation. He lends tremendous weight to whatever he says. And as he knows, Enea doesn't know anything about the Catholic religion. I could have referred to the christening, to the confirmation, but maybe I shouldn't say this in front of him. He, this child, really brought something even more valuable to the film. His suffering, his anxiety, his humanity, his pain, which he hid, and even the enigma in the way he looked. Enea, who portrayed Edgardo, he seemed to understand what people are thinking. When he's on the boat, for example, just the mere way he looks at things shows that he has understood that he has to survive, he has to adapt. Let's not forget that little Edgardo, historically, was never mistreated. On the contrary, he was treated with great kindness and care. He was never hit or punished or struck. The Pope wanted to protect him right from the very beginning. He gave him an annual allowance for his studies. The Pope, for the Pope, this young child became a symbol of the defense of the temporal and spiritual power of the Pope, and the Pope's power was beginning to crumble. A dictator doesn't want to lose power. He would rather hold on to it right until he falls from power. Just think about the madness of Hitler or other dictators. Dictators who are political dictators, but also spiritual dictators in this respect. Pope Pius IX says, no, I will not give up Edgardo.
Oui, bonjour, Laurent de CNews.fr et de Radio Shalom. Je voudrais d'abord féliciter
I'd like to congratulate the entire cast and team for this wonderful film. May I put a question to Marco? May I also congratulate Barbara Ronchi, who is quite outstanding in this film. She portrays such emotion and power. I thought the film had an outstanding screenplay. It's a real example of pace, historical suspense. You're not bored a second. Each scene, while you want to see the next one, even at the end of the film, you want it to go on, because one had any number of questions still in mind. One wanted to know more. Of course, you had the book, you had this original idea, but how do you manage to write such a riveting script? Did you spend a lot of time writing the screenplay? You called on outside people. Did you have it read by several people to get their view? The script is exceptionally modern, in fact. It adds tremendous value to the film, and it really highlights the role of the screenwriter, who is so essential if a film is to be successful. We have Susanna Nicciarelli with us, who is the co-scriptwriter with Marco Bellochio. Marco, would you like to answer?
No, lasciamola a Susanna.
Let's give the floor to Susanna Nicciarelli. To answer this question, it would take 3 or 4 hours. Of course, I was deeply touched by the fact that people spoke both Hebrew and Latin. The child learned his dialogue, his words, in both these 2 languages. You are Jewish, and a lot of Jews were very surprised by the accuracy of the acting, including that of the child.
No, in francese, in italiano.
Comme vous voulez.
Je crois que la force, c'est le fait qu'on a travaillé sur les sources directes.
We worked on the direct sources a lot.
Les chroniques, les dépositions.
We had, in fact, the minutes, the report of the trial, and we also had the testimony of Mariana Mortara. When the policemen turn up, they took the names of all the children. All these details are absolutely true. We had this in the testimonials of Mariana Mortara. And so we just had to choose from what was truly real and true. And the position of Mariana Mortara was a very strong, powerful one, because it's a story that really happened. And I think it's this strength that also helped the actors. Most of the film is absolutely true. It's absolutely real. These are real events. And Marco chose the things that inspired him most. Any other questions?
Bonjour, David Rich, France 24.
David Rich.
J'aurais voulu savoir précisément quand vous
I'd
avez
like to
découvert
know
cette histoire.
when you discovered this story, and also religion is a core theme of the film. Why does this theme systematically come up in your work?
È una domanda a cui è impossibile rispondere, perché com'è?
It's impossible to answer this question.
No, qui non è tanto disquisire sulla religione, ma è il rapimento.
The point is not really to debate or discuss religion. The focal point is the kidnapping of this child in the name of religion. That's what struck me. According to the Pope, this child had to be saved. And this child, in one way or another, from the viewpoint of certain Catholics, this child had converted. And for some people, they view that as the absolute truth of the matter. Yet at the beginning, he refuses. The questions arise later on. What's really important is to do something right, to do something well, to do things with compassion. And it's not just rhetorical to say that the film is what it is and can be interpreted by each and every spectator. We try to answer certain questions, but I can't say anything more. Gérard Chargé, Sinezou. I have a question for the actors. I'd like to know what your characters inspired in you. How did you manage to portray these characters in such a convincing manner? And I have a question for Marco Bellochio. Was this an isolated case? Did you look that up? In the case of the little boy who is ill, one might think it's not an isolated case. Were there a lot of children who were kidnapped by the church? Let's start with the actors. Barbara Ronchi, would you like to talk about your experience?
Buongiorno a tutti. Mi aveva molto colpito questa
Good morning, everybody.
fotografia che era rimasta di Marianna Mortara, ormai anziana, con questi due figli.
I conjured up a certain idea of Mariana. She had all these children. I saw some photos of her when she was growing old, and she slumps a little bit, as though her body was tired and bent while she remained very alert. So I had the impression that she was a woman who had remained extremely dignified. She refused to convert to Catholicism. She always maintained her position. She wanted to remain true to her roots. That is something very grand, something very great. And of course, she has tried to defend her son. She made almost political statements. That's what really touched me no end in this character, that is Mariana Mortara.
On peut demander aussi à Leonardo Maltese pour votre rôle aussi du Edgardo
your character, Edgardo, when he's older? What did you learn from this part?
Sicuramente nel personaggio di Edgardo ho sentito
It
un
goes
forte
without saying that the
interiore
character, Edgardo, is a very troubling one. Portraying this character, I felt quite troubled deep within myself. When preparing for the character, I didn't feel that I was being traumatized, even if I asked myself any number of questions about the character Eduardo as an adult. Once he becomes an adult, Edgardo is fully aware of what happened, that he's been separated from his family, he understands about his whole life. So this pain he experiences, this pain deep within himself, is something I tried to portray in my character, particularly in the first scenes where Edgardo is a child. I think that, for an actor, is a real source of inspiration, because that's what turns into Edgardo as an adult. And then, of course, once I'd seen the character Edgardo through the eyes of a child, things became much more clear.
Russo, Alesi, pour votre rôle, vous êtes le père d'Edgardo.
You are the father of Edgardo. You've often worked with Marco Bellochio. What kind of energy, what kind of emotion did you have to use? What kind of passion, what kind of intensity were required to play this part?
Buongiorno. Il personaggio si muove nella complessità di questa vicenda, ma quello che
Momolo Mortara is a complex character. Marco asked me right at the beginning, and this is something we had in the screenplay, he asked me to portray this character in a very human way, over and above the political or historical or religious context. What was necessary was that this character who's had his right thwarted, that is, the right to live with his children, because one of his children was abducted, was kidnapped. This character had to learn to survive, to go on with life, and despite the very difficult context, to find a way to continue. The character is a real volcano because he's living a real tragedy. It's extremely traumatic. But he tries to use dialogue as a weapon. Sometimes he asks himself questions. He wonders whether he can give up his own dignity. On the other hand, he remains very, very human. And he accepts a degree of compromise in order to be able to see his son again, because that's what's most important. He agrees to all this in a trusting manner, and he remains confident and trusting. Obviously, he retains the hope of seeing his son again one day, and he believes in the law.
Fabrizio Gifuni de me parler de son rôle qui est quand même un
Could
rôle
you
très
talk
particulier,
about
celui
your
de
part,
l'inquisiteur,
which is a very
et qui va
special
aussi
one, that of the
requiert
inquisitor?
certainement une énergie
That
très
called
spécifique
for a
et
very
aussi une
specific kind of
gestuelle
energy
très
and
particulière.
certain gestures which were extremely well depicted.
Allora, buongiorno. Ma per me,
Good
devo
morning.
dire, innanzitutto,
Well,
io sono
insofar as
partito
I'm
dalla
concerned,
gioia
first of
e
all,
dall'entusiasmo di fare un nuovo film
in
con
this
Marco
project,
Bellocchio.
I
Prima
leapt into
di
it with
ogni
great
altra cosa.
enthusiasm. Making
Poi,
a film with Marco
naturalmente,
Bellocchio is a wonderful
c'è la
experience.
storia, c'è un personaggio che
You
volta
have
per
this
volta
story,
si affronta. Io avevo fatto un lungo
which is a very real
viaggio
one, and my
immersivo
character
con Marco in un personaggio completamente diverso,
plunged together
che era
with
Aldo Moro, che
Marco
molti di voi hanno visto lo
into
scorso anno
this
qui a Cannes,
context,
e quindi
which is very
c'è
complex.
così anche
And then there was another project
insomma,
which
questo
you
film
saw
tratta dei
last
temi
year in
molto
Cannes.
importanti,
This
molto
film
profondi, però poi dal punto di
touches on
vista
some
di
very
noi
deep,
interpreti non
important
bisogna
issues.
mai dimenticarsi
For we actors,
così, dico, il gioco, la fantasia, l'immaginazione,
one mustn't forget that it's just a game.
deragliare
It's
improvvisamente dalla propria
imaginary.
vita ed entrare arbitrariamente in altre vite, in altre epoche.
Sometimes in one's
Su questo, insomma, il
life,
tema che mi affascina molto di questo
one has the
film,
opportunity to
e quindi anche di questo
become a
personaggio
different
che ho
character who lived
così
in a
chiamato
different
a
part of the world and a different time in history. That's what we do.
Che è una cosa che fa parte proprio della storia dell'uomo, delle
Being this
religioni, in particolare delle
inquisitor, a
religioni
religious
monoteiste,
character, well, that's part
che
of
hanno dovuto
the history of
difendere per
mankind, the
resistere nei
history of
secoli,
religions, of
così,
monotheistic
l'esistenza di un solo
religions. For centuries and
questo
centuries,
riguarda
the
anche
religions
religioni non
tried to defend
monoteiste,
themselves,
e in nome
and they
della
referred solely to
difesa
God.
di questo
I'm
unico
referring to the
Dio,
monotheistic
si sono
religions above all.
commesse nel corso dei secoli
In the name
atrocità
of this
e si
God,
commettono
appalling
tuttora
things have been done over the centuries, and it still
e
continues.
questo in
There have
nome di un
been
principio superiore, il grande
horrendous
paradosso
wars
è
of
in nome
religion
di
in the
una
past in the
giustizia
name of some
divina.
higher
Quindi,
principle,
come se
in the name
le
of some
religioni
divine
da
justice. People are doing
esperienze
appalling
appunto
things,
potenzialmente belle,
as though
luminose, confortanti, che poi
religions
ciascuno vive
which
nel
have a
proprio
potentially
modo,
marvelous message,
siano
although
quasi
it's as though
condannate
these religions
dalla storia
were
a
almost
diventare anche, come
condemned
diceva
by
Marco,
history to become, as Marco
luoghi
said,
di intolleranza, di
places of
violenza.
intolerance,
E
violence.
il personaggio, io ho cercato, così, è un personaggio che vive di poche scene ma molto precise.
My
e
character
ho cercato
in
con
the
Marco
film
di lavorare su
has
interiormente
shaped
su quello
his
che si può
entire
essere
life on the basis of
spezzato
these
anche
beliefs.
all'interno di
Marco
un
wanted this character to show
funzionario che è
his inner
abituato ad
life,
applicare la
even if
legge.
his inner
Il suo
workings don't
compito
work
è
very
quello
well,
e non c'è
because
un
in
altro
his inner
compito.
life
Però cosa
he
succede
applies the law
all'interno
full stop without
di un,
any personal
così, di un
doubts.
rappresentante
What
di questa
happens
istituzione che è stata la Santa
deep
Inquisizione
inside
del Medioevo, ha
a
fatto
person
cose
like that,
atroci,
who's
poi
representing an
siamo
institution like the
nell'800.
church, an inquisitor? who's committed the most heinous
parzialmente
acts.
un'altra cosa. Cosa succede all'interno? Cioè quanto quest'uomo crede fino in
Another issue. But
fondo
what
e cosa è
happens in
costretto
deep
a
within a
fare
character like that? You have
a
to
sua volta
define
alla
that. You have
propria
to
interiorità per credere
try to
fermamente. Io credo che si spezzi
understand
qualcosa
what
internamente, su
this
questo ho
kind of a
cercato di
character
lavorare
believes in.
e
How can he do
questa
these things?
rottura
I tried to work on all these
conscia,
subjects.
inconscia, provoca forse così, un
You
appannamento
have
dello
the
sguardo, è come se lo
conscious
sguardo non avesse
thoughts and then the
più vita.
subconscious, and a great divide between the two. I tried to show this in my character, as though in the way he looks, you can see these two different levels.
Comme le cas d'Edgardo. Oui, est-ce qu'il y a eu beaucoup d'autres cas comme
Were
celui
there a lot of
d'Edgardo
other
à votre
cases like that of
connaissance en
Edgardo in Italy, to your knowledge?
Rinunciate? Ma certamente ci sono stati tanti casi a partire dal
Yes, of
500
course.
a
There
centinaia e
were
centinaia. Il
any
problema
number
era
of
sempre
cases, hundreds and
non
hundreds,
sempre, spesso legato al fatto
in
che la
the
famiglia ebraica
19th century,
proprio
in the 1800s. This
quel
was due to the
giorno e
fact
mezzo
that
di
Jewish
Shabbat
families
aveva bisogno di una servitù
during
cattolica
Shabbat
e abbastanza spesso
needed
i bambini
to have a
erano
Catholic
stati
servant,
battezzati
and quite often
clandestinamente come è
the
accaduto per
children
Edgardo,
were
da una
christened
cameriera
in secret
cattolica.
by a Catholic servant in working for a Jewish family, as you see in the case of Edgardo.
È proprio il più clamoroso e
The case
che è
of Edgardo, however, is the one that's most known.
al confine
It's the most political
della
case
dissoluzione dello
because
Stato pontificio. Allora appunto il Papa si serve
this
come un
event
baluardo
arose at a time when the papal states were collapsing. So the Pope uses Edgardo like a lifesaver and tries to defend his stance at all costs.
Poi c'è stato
But
qualche
I'd like
altro
to repeat
caso,
what I
però,
said earlier on.
è chiaro
There were
che
other
con
cases,
la
indeed.
sconfitta temporale della Chiesa il suo potere è diminuito fortemente.
There were other cases, and with the fall of the church,
On va aussi
the
poser une
power
question
diminished.
à Paolo Pierobon qui a aussi un personnage très important.
Of course, there's a character who's extremely important, a character who often crops up in Marco Bellochio's films. Here I'm referring to the Pope. Could you tell us how you managed to portray the Pope? You represent power, you represent a lot of very important things. How did you go about acting this character? And what was it like acting with a child?
Certo, buongiorno a tutti. È indubbiamente un personaggio estremo e
It goes without saying that he's a very extreme character. He's full of contradictions.
Un'interpretazione monocorde o comunque
He's not a character who you can act out in a sort of a uniform, monochrome way.
Una fragilità opposta fisica.
The Pope suffered from epilepsy.
Pensando non tanto proprio alla sua vita che ho
He held power for a very long time.
E alla sua carriera ecclesiastica che ho approfondito, mi sono lasciato un po' trasportare dalla
I
cultura di
studied
Bacon,
the career of this Pope in great detail. I also studied other popes
di Velázquez, che secondo me riguarda anche molto la cinematografia di Marco, cioè c'è una filologia, un rigore, un naturalismo, un realismo di ricerca
were
di
painted by Velázquez in a very realistic manner. He always painted people in their context. In any event, insofar as I'm concerned, I tried to listen to what this Pope had to say. I tried to really become him, feel his feelings. I think it's impossible to talk about this film without referring to the music in the film. How did you work on the music, and at what time in the production of the film did you start to introduce the music and work on the music?
lavorato anche con Francesca e con Stefano che hanno firmato il montaggio.
We worked with Stefano
in modo abbastanza
and
classico, nel
Francesca
senso che
on the editing in a very traditional way. We contacted a composer with whom we had already worked, a young, very talented composer. The pace of the music during the editing underlines the tension. We tried to find music which really matched the film.
Qualcuno, adesso non voglio, perché ma sono stato io, non me ne frega niente, però è il Sostakovich e anche Arvo Part.
Shostakovich, for example.
E Rachmaninoff.
And Rachmaninoff as well.
Tre tempi diversi che
they have different rhythms, different paces. And these paces work very well with Fabio's music. Of course, there are films without music, but music on the whole plays a very important part. I think that this film can be considered a tragedy. Whatever the case may be, you have the church on one hand and melodramas on the other, tragedies on the other. These are things that happen in the course of history. We wanted the story to be really marked by the music, which would have a very distinctive rhythm and sound. For me, in my lengthy experience, I note that what works best is things that have been carefully thought about, reflected on ahead of time. For example, Momolo Mortara, when he breaks down, because he understands that the child will not be given back. There you have the music which underscores this moment. Shylock, the Merchant of Venice. That's something I hadn't really thought of. At that very moment in the film, the music is really powerful, and it says reams about the situation, much more than words could do. And with Susanna, we tried to be very modest in terms of the text at that moment in the movie. That's what I wanted to say. I asked Enea if he wanted to say anything, and he said no. No, he doesn't want to speak. Thank you very much. The press conference now comes to an end, and I'd like to thank you all, and I'd like to thank the whole crew and the team that worked on Kidnapped.